Welcome back everyone. Sorry about the wait between videos, but here's part 3 of my Reliant build. Now here I'm going to show you the lights I put into this model, as well as the 2 flasher boards I made. So let's jump right in. The last time we saw the saucer, it was ready for lighting. Now this is the actual first time I'd be putting lights in a model, so I was a little uncertain how to do it right. So here I was testing out putting some lights along the edges, and eventually got the hang of it, and boom, there we go. All the lights were in. At least I thought those were the ones I was going to use only, but I ended up using more in the end, but we'll talk about that a bit later. Now here's a nice shot of the effect through the windows that I drilled out. Yes, I know the windows are still not perfect yet. Give it time, it'll get there. So here you can see the windows underneath the saucer. They light up pretty well. And here's a nice little test with the top of the saucer on, and it looks pretty good. Yeah, I know all the windows are on. Realistically, that shouldn't happen, right? I mean, not everybody's in their room all the fucking time, and they wouldn't leave their lights on and waste power. So yeah, some windows would be off, some windows would be on. I do that for the bigger ships, like let's say the Enterprise D, but this one's tiny in comparison, so I figured, yeah, okay, all the lights are on. Fuck, they do it in the movies anyway, so fuck it. So the rest of these pictures, you can see that it's just me taking various angles, various shots of the model to see how the lights look. I was really excited with this because it was the first time I was putting lights in a model, like I said, and I was just amazed at how awesome it looked. But yeah, so the next thing I want to light were the impulse crystals. Now I mentioned them in a previous video that I was lighting both, and I diffused the lenses. However, I didn't want to paint them blue. The reason for that is because when it was off, I didn't want to have a blue tone on the dome. I want to look kind of, you know, the lights were off, so it would be dark but not blue. So I had to put blue lights, but I didn't have any blue lights on hand. I had blue LED strips, but I didn't have any individual blue LEDs. So I was faced with a bit of a problem. But then it occurred to me, I did this theater gel thing on the torpedo launcher. Why don't I do something similar on the impulse crystals? The only problem was I only had red theater gel and not blue. So the solution I came up with was plexiglass. I painted plexiglass clear blue, a bunch of coats of clear blue from my airbrush, and I glued it right on top of the hole for the dome. I made sure the dome was there first, otherwise I couldn't get it in. And the effect was pretty good. It came out pretty well. However, when I light tested it, there wasn't enough lights near it. It was sort of dim, so I put another light strip in the back and it lit it up beautifully. Now I noticed one problem with this plexiglass idea is that the plexiglass is much thicker than the theater gel, and that posed a bit of a problem for the impulse engines because that crystal is really close to where the engines are. Now, when I test fitted the impulse engine lenses, the blue was bleeding through and it made a kind of a purplish tint. So I would have to make a little light box for the impulse engines, but I solved that problem much later on in the build, so we'll get to that when I get there. Now, the next thing I added were tiny little red theater gel strips for the holes I did in the top shuttle bay trenches. I don't know what to call them, right? So I wanted to give it a couple little red lights in there, make it a little less boring, and it ended up being pretty cool. So what you're looking at is a mock-up of a flasher board that I was going to make. Now, in the middle there you can see a 555 timer chip, and that's the heart of this flasher board. I didn't want to buy one because I'm fucking poor, so I decided, hey, maybe I'll try to make one on my own. It'll be cheaper, I hope. It's not going to be PCB, but at least I can do it. And it worked. Surprisingly, I was really amazed the first time I tried it, and it worked. So I have 2 circuits I'm going to make. One's going to be a slow flashing circuit, as you can see here, and another will be a fast one for the strobe lights. But of course, everything was going so well, something had to fuck up sooner or later, and it had to be my power supply. Now, I have a lot of lights on this model, and they're all in parallel, and I don't think a 9-volt battery will be enough to test anything, so I was pretty fucking pissed off when this happened, considering this power supply is only 3 months old. So I opened it up, and I was looking around testing with my voltmeter to see where it wasn't working. The diodes weren't burnt out, the capacitor didn't have any cracks in it, the transformer looked fine, but lo and behold, I found this one little connection right next to the switch. The wire burnt. Here's a zoom up of it. The wire fucking burnt. Why? Because it was stranded wire, and only like 2 or 3 strands were actually connected to the connector, and they burnt out from me turning the thing on and off so often. So I replaced it with a thicker gauge wire, and boom, it worked, and I was fucking happy. Thank you to my friend who looked at this with me, because I barely know anything about electronics. I'm not an electrician. So that was my first big fuck up to happen to this model, and it wouldn't have been my last, but I'm glad that it was solved. So anyway, time to move on. Now, you may have noticed the lights on the saucer are warm white. I chose that because I figured since they'd be crew cabins, they'd have a nice warmer yellowy white rather than a big cold blue light, which would be more for business. So I figured, hey, the BC deck and the bridge, it's all business there, so it'll have a cool white. But I need to make a light box. Yeah, I know I didn't want to make one, but this one was easy because it was just a piece of styrene slapped on the bottom, and it was good to go. So there I placed not 1 strip, as you can see here, but I actually had to place 3 because 1 wasn't bright enough. But the effect was great in the end. However, the picture doesn't really show it that well. I should have took one in a darker setting, but I guess I'm a fucking idiot because, well, I took one in the day. But you can sort of see it's a little yellow on the windows on the bottom, a little more bluer on the top. So after several tests on my breadboard, I managed to get the flasher circuit the way I want it to, flashing at the appropriate rate and so forth. So I decided to start putting it onto a little board. I did this by hand, so it looks kind of crappy, right? Underneath you can see it's all a big jumble of crappy wires and soldering and whatnot, but it worked. That's the important part. It worked. So I cut it out and I put it in my model. Now I put 2 in there, right? 1 for each flashing circuit. Now there's some problems putting a flasher board, especially one that you make, inside your model, but we'll get to that a bit later. Here you can see I started putting the SMDs inside the model so that I can have my flashing red and flashing green and flashing white lights. So next up were the spotlights on this model. Yes, I'm going to put spotlights. I'm not going to do Raytheon lighting like I did on the nacelles. Here I have room on the saucer to put some nice little SMD spotlights. I'm going to do 1 for the registry on the top and 3 underneath of the saucer. I know it's supposed to be like 1 usually. Sometimes in some frames you see it have 3. These are all exterior lightings, and the people who made the movies, they put lights whenever they felt like, essentially. So I went with 3 underneath and 1 on the top. Now the first thing I did was cut some holes on the top of the bridge so I can have my light shine through. Now this is not the refit kit. I can't actually move the bridge area forward to do that little spotlight trick on the refit. This is solid resin. I can't do that as easily. So I tried my very best to fit an SMD inside that big wide groove you see there on the top bridge, and try as I might, it wouldn't shine properly in the registry. Like, the light would have to be literally sticking out of the model for it to shine. So my solution was to drill into the BC deck and put a little spotlight there. I know it's not Canon, but it's the best I can do. And it looks good to me. It looks good. It shines properly. You can see the shadow from the phasers on top, so it looks pretty good. So next I did the lights underneath, on the bottom saucer from the planetary sensor dome. This was a little tricky. This, I had to use hot glue to glue these lights like I do normally for the SMDs. But the trick I did here is I let in a big goop of hot glue right at the window, and then as it was hot I put in my SMD as it was on at the same time, and I sort of aligned it to make sure it would shine on the bottom saucer, and I held it there for a couple minutes and it was good. I did that 3 times and the effect is pretty stunning to me, actually. Now, remember when I said there'd be problems putting a board inside your model? Well, that happened to me, and luckily the model wasn't closed up yet. I tested both circuits to see if they work, and then my 555 timer began to smoke up. I'm like, what the fuck? How did this happen? Turns out when I hot glued the board into place, I squished it a little, and I think I had a short. Now, this is because of the installation. Now, when your model is sealed up and the board's inside and you have a problem that you didn't see when you were assembling it and you're testing everything was fine, but let's say, I don't know, 3 months later, something went wrong with the board. What do? You can open up the model and change it. That's costly. That's pretty difficult to do. Now, from this point on, I decided, okay, I'm not going to put the flasher boards inside a model ever again. Don't want that to happen again. This time I'll just run the wires down the base and put the flasher in the base. This is a trick I found out from Simon Merks, Papa Smurf over there, Simon Merks. He warns you to not put the board in your model, and stupid me decided, I'll do it anyway, I know better. No, I don't. I should have listened to you, Simon. My fault. So I had to rip those fuckers out, and it pulled up the paint. Yeah, this wouldn't normally happen if I used proper paint to begin with, but as I was learning, I was using different types of automotive paint and no primer and putting different paint layers over paint layers. But because this thing was already light blocked and lights are installed, I couldn't light block it again without getting paint everywhere, so I just put some aluminum foil tape and the problem was solved. So some of you may have noticed that I've only had rods sticking out of the Reliant. I didn't actually have it upright on a base. So I was getting tired of juggling the model and all my other things on my messy desk. So I figured I'll finally get that base into place. This is a Polar Lights dome I had to buy separate from the model because the model came with crappy little plastic skis or something that the Reliant's supposed to rest on. So anyway, got that done, attached it, and then attached it to the model, and it looks okay, I guess. It kind of looks like it's leaning forward. That's just me with the camera not knowing how to take a picture. Anyway, next up we're installing the strobe lights and nav lights in the upper saucer. I did them all in parallel, so I have these giant ass resistors for these tiny little SMDs. Funny story behind that, I'll tell you a bit later. Anyway, I got it all set up on the top of the saucer and it works well. Next, I was drilling windows. Yeah, I didn't have all the windows drilled out, only a few were there. So I drilled them out with the nice window guides that came with the Paragraphic set, and they came out pretty well. A little messy as per usual, but I'll get them cleaned up. Okay, time for the impulse engines. Now remember that plexiglass was sort of in the way, making the light turn sort of purple, so I had to add some red LEDs. I added two, one for each little port, and they work pretty well. A little powerful in my opinion, a little too powerful, like they really light up the fucking room at night. So stupid me decided not to put extra resistors. I guess what I'll have to do is diffuse the light as best I can. Anyway, next up was the bridge again. Now the bridge is all light blocked and I added the flashing nav light on the top. I did that because, well, it needs one on top of the bridge. So I sealed it all up. You can see underneath I have all that aluminum taped to make that little light box for the BC deck, and I had it ready to go. I was doing a final test, a final check on the lights, make sure everything was great before I sealed the bridge, and I was able to, and it works well. It looks okay. Now, yeah, you may notice like the front little hole for the bridge has a big wide gap instead of three little lights like the other sides. I'll try to fix that in the future. I don't know if I will. It looks okay in my opinion. Now these next couple of shots are shots of all the lights that will be in the saucer fully installed and working. As you can see, it works pretty well to me. So that means this thing is almost ready to be sealed up, and I was pretty nervous doing that because I knew once I sealed it up I didn't want to open it again, and if anything went wrong I'd be fucked. So yeah, everything looks good. The navs blink. Well, they don't blink yet, they're not attached to the circuit, but they turn on and they work on the top and the bottom. The impulse engines are nice and bright, the blue crystals shine, the spotlights are good. This thing is ready to seal up. So here's a final look on the inside, ready to be sealed up, but we're gonna see that in the next video because this is getting kinda long. So I'll try to get the next video out as soon as I can. I'm doing the best I can, you know. I do want to actually finish the model, not just narrate everything I do. But yeah, tune in next time as I continue to make this model that sucks a lot of balls into the lovely Reliant. Thanks for listening.